Hello, hello. We're going to go live right here on YouTube with our perennial topic, our perennial recurring theme, which is sidereal versus tropical, especially in Vedic astrology. So what's going on is I actually finally have a second person willing to do the astrology, the sidereal versus tropical debate in the format that I did previously with Richard Fiddler, which you could still find on my channel from the channel page. You can go back and look in the videos to find that. It was an interesting debate. So I've been preparing responses to this person's points. So I wanted to take the opportunity of doing a live stream to explain some of these points more slowly to make sure that I can figure out how to explain them in a short debate format, and also to help you explore these things at a slower pace and give you a chance to ask questions about them if you want. So if you have questions about the things that I'm talking about, as long as those questions are on topic, then I'll be looking at those. I'll check those questions. Okay, so let's see. So the first thing to talk about is the concept that, hey, the classic texts, sometimes they just say, look, Aries begins with Ashwini, and why isn't the argument just done there? If Aries begins with Ashwini, then the zodiac is bound to a star, which means it's tropical. Which means it's sidereal, and that's the end of the story. So the point here is, sometimes the classical texts say Aries begins with Ashwini. Sometimes they say Aries begins with the spring equinox. They say that Aries, Libra, Cancer, and Capricorn begin with the equinoxes and solstices. So that's the problem. The problem is that sometimes they say Aries begins with Ashwini, and sometimes they say it begins with the equinoxes. That's why it's confusing. If it wasn't confusing, if they just said one thing, then there would be no confusion on the topic. There would be no need for debates to try to figure it out. But the whole problem arises because classic texts in this place say the zodiac is reference to the star, like the Aries begins with Ashwini, and in another place they reference the zodiac to the equinoxes. They say Aries begins with the equinox. So that's what we have to work on there. We have to figure out, why are they saying two things? And then to make the matter even more complicated, they don't always say that Aries begins with Ashwini. Some of them, like Taittiriya Brahmana and Rig Veda, and the attachments to the Rig Veda, they say that Kritika is the first nakshatra, and that they were written at a time when Aries was beginning with Kritika. So it's not simple. The argument from classical texts is not simple. That's why it is arguable. That's why there's this whole discussion about it. Let me see if I got anybody watching, and see if you got any questions about this. So far, any questions? Who's watching? 12 people. All right. So if you have any questions about the things that I'm saying, like this specific point, then go ahead and I'll try to address that. Now, let's go to another point. So, some people now, where do the classical texts even say that Aries begins with Ashwini? So, I want to address a couple of the misconceptions about this. Okay, the first one let's talk about is that Brihat Parashara Shastra says that Aries starts with Ashwini, and therefore Brihat Parashara Shastra supports a sidereal zodiac. Let's talk about that. This is going to be in reference to what's usually chapter 3, text number 4. And let me read you this. So the thing is, this statement, not just text 4 actually, but the group of texts around the 4th text in the 3rd chapter, usually sometimes it's the 5th chapter, depending on your version. This doesn't say that Aries starts with Ashwini. Let me show you what it does say, okay? Akashe yani drishyante Jyotirbimbanyane. So that means when you look at the sky, you see a lot of dots of light. Teshu nakshatra sangyani graha sangyani kanichit. Some of those dots of light, we call those guys nakshatras. And sometimes there's other dots of light that we call grahas. Nakshatras means constellations and graha means planet. So far what's been said is if you look at the sky, you see a bunch of dots of light. Some of the lights are constellations. A few of them are planets. Now it's going to go on and explain what the difference is between a nakshatra and a planet. Tani nakshatra namani sthira sthanani yani vai. These guys are called nakshatras because they don't move. They're called constellations because they group together and they don't change their grouping. They're stars that are grouped together and they don't change, they don't move. So that's what it says there. Tani nakshatra namani sthira sthanani yani vai. They're called nakshatras because they stick together. Then the other ones, gachanto bhani klanti sattamyet te graha. The other dots are called graha or planets because they move, as if they have will, as if they have their own will. So very simple so far, right? You look at the sky, you see dots of light, tons of dots of light. Some of them are called nakshatras, others are called grahas. The reason why they're called nakshatras is because they stand still. So the ones that stand still, stay together, those are nakshatras, constellations. The ones that don't stand still, they move, they don't stay in relation to the others, those are called grahas, planets. Not difficult so far. Now, Bachakrasya Nagashvangsha Ashvinyadi Samadvayaha. The celestial wheel, Bachakra, has anksha or integral portions. And those portions are called Ashvini and so on, right? So now he's saying, when you look up there at the sky and you see all those dots of light, some are nakshatras, some are grahas. These nakshatras form this chakra, this wheel, a bhachakra, a celestial wheel. And it has amsha, it has integral portions. And those portions are named Ashvini, so on. So those are the nakshatras. Then finally it says Tad. Dvadasha vibhagas tu. Tulya meshadi sangyakaha. It also has similar, separate divisions, 12, known as Mesha or Aries and so on. Okay?
Hi, Daddy!
Hi, Looney. Okay, so see what is going on here. This does not say that Aries begins with Ashvini. It says that the nakshatras begin with Ashvini. And the Rashis begin with Mesha or Aries. Those are two different things. It's not saying that the Rashis begin with Ashvini, and it's not saying that Ashvini begins with Aries. It's saying the nakshatras begin with Ashvini and the Rashis begin with Aries, and actually it differentiates the two in very important ways. It differentiates nakshatras from Rashis in two important ways. First of all, it uses the word tu, and it uses the word tulya. Tu means it's not the same. Tu is like the English word but. So this is not the same as the previous thing. When you say blah, 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 but jujuju, the jujuju part is different from the blah, blah, blah part, right? So that's how the word tu is used in Sanskrit. We have dots of lights in the sky, and some of them are nakshatras and some of them are planet, but, and you can divide those stars into constellations that start with Ashvini, but there's a vibhaga. Vibhaga is another important word. The nakshatras are called amshas, or integral portions. The rashis are called vibhagas. Vibhaga means a differentiation, a different way of dividing it. So it's not an integral portion of the stars, but it's another way of dividing space, which is tulya, which can be equated to, or a similarity can be drawn between the Mesha Adi, the signs beginning with Aries, and Ashvin Adi, the nakshatras beginning with Ashvin. Okay, so the Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra doesn't say that the zodiac begins with Ashvini. So it doesn't support a sidereal way of doing horoscopes, nor does it really support a tropical one either. It's not a book about astronomy, it's a book about interpretation. It's not a book telling you how to calculate the thing to be interpreted. It's a book telling you about how to interpret the thing that you've already calculated. But from this verse alone, you can see that it's probably written by a person who thinks that the Rashis are different from the nakshatras, but can be related to them, because this person has used the word tulya, tu, and vibhaga. Does that make sense? Do you have any questions about that? See, this takes way too long to explain. I don't know how I'm going to explain this in 5 minutes. Let's see. I should probably get my glasses too, but that's hopeless now. Sidereal, I stopped doing sidereal charts at the beginning of 2012. Yeah, right. But thank you. Ant. Nakshatras are sidereal. See, they're separate. Any questions, please? Question has to be on topic, though. You're not affected by anything, but the doesn't matter if it's near or far to you. For example, Saturn is further than Venus. It doesn't mean that Venus has more effect than Saturn. You're not affected by the planets. The planets are a language that the universe uses to communicate to you. They don't affect you, but they are talking to you. What does it mean that the nakshatras begin with Ashvini? It means that Ashvini is counted by the author as the first nakshatra. Same way that if you say that the Rashis begin with Aries, it means Aries is the first one. You know the one I'm talking about, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Aries, etc. You know that circle that I'm talking about, Ashvini, Bharani, Kritika, that one, the one that starts with Ashvini. Yeah, Prakriti. So the text doesn't say that nakshatras emit their own light and planets don't. It doesn't talk about what's emitting light. It just says these are dots of light. Both the planets and stars are dots of light. They're both considered stars, actually. Greeks also thought of it this way. They both considered the planets stars, except the difference between the two is one moves and one doesn't. Seasons there's no mention of seasons here in this, but you will hear about seasons next. Okay, let's look at another one then. Hopefully that's pretty well explained. So now hopefully please, try to digest this, and the next time somebody says, Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra says that you should use a sidereal zodiac, and because I believe in Parashara, you better, you're not really good if you don't believe in Parashara. Parashara never says do a sidereal zodiac. He never really says sidereal tropical. He's not talking about the calculation of the zodiac. He's talking about the interpretation of the chart. If you want to know how to calculate things, you're better off looking in a Siddhanta, which is about the astronomy of how you calculate things. But anyway, I need to reply to these points because these are points that people bring up. Sun has got a question. We can start the zodiac with Aries, but how do we start the nakshatra with Ashvini? In which system? So that's the point that I made before. It's not permanent that the nakshatras begin with Ashvini. At the time that this author was writing, he starts the nakshatras with Ashvini. Older authors started with Kritika, and including the Babylonians, they start their thing with Mul, which is Pleiades, which is Kritika. They start their list of constellations with Kritika. So it's because of the relationship between the ascending equinox. The ascending equinox is the sunrise of the year. Just like a day starts with the sunrise, the year starts with the ascending equinox. The sunrise is when the sun comes over the horizon, and the ascending equinox is when the sun comes over the horizon. The only difference is what's the horizon. For a day, the horizon is literally the horizon of the earth. For a year, the horizon is the the equatorial plane projected out into space. So when the sun comes because it travels on an ecliptic, when it comes over the equator, it's equivalent to the sunrise of a day. Then it hits the solstice, which is like a noon. Then it comes back down to the equator, which is a sunset. Then it goes down to the next solstice, which is a midnight, equivalent to a midnight. Then it comes back up over the course of a year. So just as we begin a day with sunrise, we begin anything with sunrise. We begin a year with spring. We used to. You can begin it from any one of the cardinal points. Just like you can begin a day from midnight, because it's a cardinal point. You can begin the year from December 21st or now 31st, right? So why do authors about 2,000 years ago talk about Ashvini as if it's the first nakshatra? Because at that time Aries was there, and Aries is defined as where the sun comes over the equator. And why do older authors talk about Kritika as the first nakshatra? Because at that time Aries was there. Okay, let's talk about a different point now. Another point, some people want to say Surya Siddhanta supports only a sidereal zodiac, which is very, very bold and ridiculously bold, because the Surya Siddhanta has the most explicit definition of the zodiac as tropical. But let's see what people say. Here's a statement that the Surya Siddhanta's first chapter also says that Aries begins with Ashvini. But the truth is that the Surya Siddhanta's first chapter doesn't not say that Aries begins with Ashvini. Sorry, it just doesn't. It's like saying that Harley Quinn is in the new Joker movie. She's not. So it's like there's not a statement in the first chapter that Aries begins with Ashvini. What is this chapter about? The chapter explains, it's the first chapter of Surya Siddhanta. It's going to explain how to get your compass of where you are in gigantic history of the universe. So it explains how you can figure out your current point in the enormous history of the universe. The technique that it uses to figure that out relies on, you're going to be able to decipher the positions of the planets to figure out where you are in the time span of the universe. So in order to do that, you need to know the speed at which the planets revolve. And so for that reason, this chapter explains how many times each planet revolves past Revati Yogatar, which is a certain star, Zeta Piscium. How many times every planet will go past Zeta Piscium in one huge span of time called a yuga. And with that as your basic information, you can do calculations to figure out what yuga you are in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so that's what the first chapter actually says. It actually says that the planets make such and such number of orbits, and that the orbits begin and end from Revati's Yogatara, which is Zeta Piscium. It doesn't say anything about Aries at all. Of course, if you just open up Parashara Shastra in an English version, you might hear something about Aries in the first chapter, because the translator or the commentator is taking great license, because they're assuming that Aries begins at Zeta Piscium. But the text itself doesn't talk about the zodiac at all. It's not about the zodiac at all. It's about yugas. It has nothing to do with the zodiac. It has nothing to do with natal astrology either. It has to do with figuring out where you are in the yugas. So do you have any questions on that point? Yes, it's very amazing. Supposedly, if you know how to do this math, which I don't have patience from trigonometry and stuff like that. Supposedly, if you know how to do this math, you can identify that we're in such and such day of Brahma, such and such Manvantara, which is like this 71st portion of Brahma's day, and such Chaturyuga and such Kali Yuga. So this brings up the question, like that Neil Patel is asking, the question of there's a lot of confusion about Kali Yugas these days, and that's all because of Yukteswar, who changed the definition of things without any regard for how classics like Surya Siddhanta calculated these things, because he wanted to fit yugas to be exactly match the precession of equinoxes. So he came up with a whole new way of doing it. So what's this question? The zodiac belt is moving. Why didn't they mention anything related to the zodiac? They didn't mention anything related to the zodiac in the first chapter of Surya Siddhanta because they don't care about the zodiac there. In fact, they don't mention the zodiac until the 14th chapter, which is the last chapter. Because Indian astronomy is primarily based on nakshatras and stars. That's the way it is. Prakriti is asking about Aquarius, age of Aquarius. That's a whole Western idea. It's similar to what Yukteswar was trying to wrestle with, make these things line up, precession of equinox, defining ages, but that's not how we do this in ancient Vedic astrology. We did measurements of yugas by putting a line from the north equatorial pole through two particular stars in the Big Dipper. I think it's Danube and Merak, I think the names are. And then letting that ray hit the nakshatra ecliptic. That was one way it was done. And that point would move, and you would be able to tell what yuga you're in by that. And another way that it was done is as the Surya Siddhanta does it, which is it identifies certain configurations of planets that will mark the beginning of certain ages. So I don't know anything about Age of Aquarius because it's not my specialty. It's a new thing. It's a Western thing. Neil wants to know, if we only rely on nakshatras, does that remove the need of a 12-sign zodiac? Yeah, it removes the need of a 12-sign zodiac, but it's also going to remove your 12 houses, your 12 lords, your ascendant. Maybe not your ascendant. You could keep an ascendant. So there is a need for the 12 signs and the 12 houses. You lose 90% of your interpretive tools if you do away with the 12 signs. What are you going to do? You're going to do away with all of your dignities. You're going to do away with all of your amshas and vargas. But yes, you can do some kind of rudimentary, cool, but rudimentary natal astrology with nakshatras alone. And yes, you can do pretty elaborate electional astrology with nakshatras alone. But there's a reason why the 12 zodiac signs became so popular and took over astrology, because they're really, really useful. It's a really amazing toolbox. Okay. Let's look at another point. So far, Hora Shastra doesn't say that Aries begins with Ashwini. Surya Siddhanta chapter 1 doesn't say that Aries begins with Ashwini. Now, there's some interesting stuff about Atharva Veda. Now, you may know the really ancient core of the Vedas are called the Samhitas. They're very, very old. Historians date them to around 5,000 years old. That would be the linguistic dating of it, and also based on astronomy and astrology, also they date these things. This would be the last time that there was a significant editorial update to the text. You may know that there's some oblique references or allegorical references to astrology there. Sometimes it's quite explicit, like I translated Taittiriya Brahmanas, bits about the nakshatras. There's some really elaborate, amazing stuff in there. But for the most part, there's a couple of quick allegories about zodiac stuff. And mostly the allegory is that of a wheel with a hub and spokes and pegs, right? And this wheel is actually a description of the year, which is the course of the sun around the earth, apparently. And then it gets divided into signs. So this person is presenting a argument that the Atharva Veda describes the zodiac wheel and says that it's fixed. And so because it says it's fixed, that means that it's sidereal. Now, this is a really weak argument. It's a very weak argument. Fixed means fixed. Fixed doesn't mean sidereal. Okay? So the Atharva Veda, it does say that the celestial wheel is avichal, which means it's fixed, or it doesn't change, it doesn't decay, or it doesn't go off course. So it does say that the celestial wheel is fixed, but it doesn't say that it's fixed to stars. Sidereal means a sidereal zodiac means the Aries 0 degrees Aries is determined by its fixture to a certain star, by how it's fixed to a star. Tropical zodiac means Aries 0 point is determined by its fixture to the equinox. Right? That's the only difference. So if the Atharva Veda says, hey, the zodiac wheel is fixed, it doesn't mean that it's fixed to a star. It doesn't mean this Atharva Veda, an analogy of the wheel with spokes and all that stuff in hubs, doesn't mention stars at all. It mentions days as the pegs on the wheel, months as the spokes, and 3 hubs. And we need to know what these 3 hubs are, actually. But it's just talking about days and months in a year, which is the zodiac. That's the 12 sign zodiac. And what is it fixed to? It's fixed to each other. The parts of the wheel are permanently fixed. There's never 31, like we do it nowadays. In this Vedic wheel, the zodiac wheel, there's never 31 degrees in a sign. It's 30 degrees. It doesn't change. The size of the thing doesn't change over time. And they don't change their relationship. The parts don't change their relationships to each other. The months don't move over the days. The whole thing doesn't move in relation to the hub. The wheel is one big, gigantic, complete thing that turns together. Okay? So the really interesting thing, though, is what the heck are these 3 hubs? The whole wheel, which is an allegory for the zodiac, is fixed to 3 hubs. Well, what are they? So these are the seasons. So in India, the way that they do seasons is very interesting, and it's not the same at all as the way that it was done in the Mediterranean. Mediterranean way of thinking of seasons was, hey, we got 4 seasons based on these 4 cardinal signs. But the Vedic way of thinking was we have 6 seasons grouped into 3. And it's still based on the cardinal direction, it's still based on the equinoxes and solstices. But instead of taking 3 signs per season, they take 2 signs per season and get 6. And then they take 4 signs per group and they get the 3 things we call gandas. So listen to this. You know, Gandanta is the end of this 3rd part of the year. So Vedic India identified 6 seasons. Each season has 2 signs or months. And each season is grouped in a pair. So there's 3 meta-seasons. The meta-seasons are warm, moderate, and cold. So you get 3 basic seasons in a year. You got a warm period of the year, you got a mild period of the year, and you got a cold period of the year. And each one of those 3 things has 2 segments in it, so that you get 6 seasons. The warm season starts when the sun gets into Aries and goes until the sun gets to Leo. That's the first Ganda. It's the first hub of the zodiac, that segment. So, and then you subdivided that into Vishant, which is the beginning part of the warm season, and Grishma, which is the intense part of the warm season. Then the moderate season starts after Grishma. That's when the sun gets into Leo. Once the sun gets into Leo and until it gets to Sagittarius. So from one fire sign to the next, each one of these 3 season groups, each one of these hubs is from one fire sign to the next, from one Gandanta to the next. Excuse me. So you get this Leo to Sagittarius moderate season. It starts with the rainy season. Rainy season is awesome. All the heat from the Grishma breaks and the temperatures become moderate, but it's still just beginning to be moderate. You don't really get moderate till Sharat, which is the second half of the moderate thing. It's just like every one of these third seasons, threefold seasons, has a lead up and then an intense. Right. So with the hot season, it's Vashant that leads up to Grishma. It really gets hot. Vashant warms up, and then Grishma is hot. Then you get Varsha into Sharat, which is you get the rainy season, which is where it starts to get moderate, and then it really is moderate when it gets to Sharat. So Sharat is when the sun is getting to Sagittarius. Now, then you get the third part, the cold part of the year is when the sun goes from Sagittarius all the way back to Aries. This is for India. And this Atharva Veda is written in India. So the cold season is from Sagittarius to Aries, and then you get that in two divisions, Hemant and Shishira. Shishira is really cold, and Hemant is when it starts getting cold. So you got these three Gandhas are the three hubs that they're talking about in this allegory. 12 spokes, 360 pegs, 12 spokes, 3 naves. That's what the Atharva Veda says. Who understands this understands the world, it says. So it's meaning you can use this wheel of 360 degrees in 12 divisions based on 3 central factors. You can use this to understand the world. You can use this as a divination tool. That's what it's saying. So now, isn't this interesting? That means that that means that the zodiac presented by the Atharva Veda is based on seasons, which are based on equinoxes. So if this reference from the Atharva Veda shows anything, which it's not, first of all, a good reference because it's just an allegory. But if you want this allegory to show anything, it suggests a tropical zodiac based on the equinoxes, because seasons are affixed to equinoxes, not a sidereal zodiac based on stars. Is that clear? Got any questions on that? How long have I been going already? Does it say? 32 minutes. I'm supposed to do this presentation in 5 minutes. Okay. So let's see. Thanks. So let's see. So finally, go back to the Surya Siddhanta. Remember, we had Surya Siddhanta. There's a claim that Surya Siddhanta chapter 1 is sidereal, right? It says that Aries begins with Ashwini. Now, I said that was really kind of bold because Surya Siddhanta has an explicitly tropical definition. So that explicitly tropical definition of the zodiac is found in Surya Siddhanta chapter 14. That's the one that says, Pachakra Nabhao Vishuvat Dutiyam Samasutragam Ayanam Dutiyam Chanye Chatusta Pratitastuti. That the Bhat Chakra, or the celestial wheel, this one has 1 hub. This is more intelligible. How a wheel could have 3 hubs, it really bends the mind. But the Surya Siddhanta says the celestial wheel has 1 hub. Bhat Chakra Nabhi, the Nabhi of the Bhat Chakra, is located where the line between the solstices, Vishuvat, and equinoxes, Ainam, crosses. And then it says the Aries begins where the equinox comes, and then you have 2 divisions in between, and then Cancer begins, and then you have 2 divisions, and then Libra begins. So that's what it says. So the person that I'm debating with is saying, this is not a definition of the zodiac. It's just a definition of the seasons. So actually, this is like saying that the Joker is not in the movie The Joker. The Joker is in the movie The Joker. That's the topic of the movie. This is a definition of the zodiac. That's the topic of the discussion. It is a definition of the zodiac. It explicitly says that Aries, Libra, and Cancer begin with the solstices and equinoxes. And like the Atharva Veda, it also describes that there's a relationship between the solstices, the equinoxes, and the resulting zodiac with seasons. Kitna prashna, you got any questions so far about this? I'm done with this. Now, after this, I'll tell you a little bit about historical arguments about sidereal zodiac. Well, let's see how you're doing. The three hubs. Okay, we got some questions from the last one. So wait, so are the 6 ritus based on the equinoxes or the nakshatras? They're based on the equinoxes. Seasons are based on equinoxes. Seasons are based on the way the sun relates to the equator. And equinox means it's right over the equator. Solstice means it's as high as it gets or it's as low as it gets. So seasons are created by the relationship of the sun to the equator, which means, is it at a solstice, an equinox, or the other solstice? So the fact that the Atharva Veda says that the zodiac wheel is based on the 3 seasons means that it's tropical. The 3 hubs Neil wants to know, are the 3 hubs the different starting points for the first 3 nakshatras? I don't know what that means. The three divisions of the zodiac. There's 360 days, 12 12 months, 12 signs, and then in the core of the thing there's just 3 segments, there's 3 gandhas. Leo to Sagittarius. No, what is it? Aries to Leo, Leo to Sagittarius, Sagittarius back to Aries. Those are the 3 segments. So those are the 3 hubs. Why are those the 3 hubs? Because of the seasons. But look, I would just say, look, it's just an allegory. Atharva Veda is just an allegory. If you really want to know about astronomy, look in an astronomy book, which is Surya Siddhanta. Or in the astronomical sections of the Puranas. The Puranas have elaborate astronomical sections, and they always describe the zodiac based on the solstices and equinoxes. You want to talk a little bit of history now? This is also interesting. After I'm done with this, I'm going to try to edit this into, make a more concise description of this and edit it into 5 minutes. Maybe I'll have to ask for 10 minutes. Now, Prakriti says, since Ashwini is in Aries now, and in ancient times it was in Kritika, this means the nakshatras are also moving, but relatively slowly. Actually, no. Ashwini is not in Aries now. Aries is now in the Bhadrapadas. It's moving towards Purva Bhadrapada. It was 2,000 years ago that Ashwini was coincident with Aries. Now it's the Bhadrapada. Previously it was Kritika, so it moves backwards. And that is why the Surya Siddhanta 3rd chapter says that the nakshatra wheel lags, or it lags behind. It describes it as if the stars are lagging behind the equinoxes. So it gradually moves what they call westward. I think in longitude it moves westward. It gradually decreases its longitude. Very slowly. I think it's basically 1 degree per century. At least that was kind of like Hipparchus's estimate. No, I'm not going to edit this video. This video will be on my channel as is, but I'm going to make a new video as a part of the debate that I'm going to be doing with somebody else. Yeah. There's movement. The stars, now, see, the nakshatras are called nakshatras because they don't move, right? The nakshatras are called nakshatras because they don't move in relationship to each other. They're fixed to each other. The signs are also fixed to each other. They don't change their relationship to each other. Virgo never comes before Leo, right? So they always stay in the same dimension and size and everything. The signs are fixed. The stars are fixed. But these 2 fixed wheels gradually move in relationship to each other. Okay. So let's see about history now. Somebody's going to claim that the Greeks invented the tropical zodiac. And they claim that the Greeks perverted the Babylonian zodiac, which was sidereal. And actually, this person says it was because of their obsession with a geocentric worldview and a lack of knowledge of precession. So first of all, it is not just the Greeks who had a geocentric worldview. Every single classical ancient culture had a geocentric worldview. And all forms of classical astrology are based on that geocentric worldview for a very good reason, because we're talking about life on Earth. We're talking about life on Earth, and we are looking up at the sky as we see it from the Earth. So, geocentric concept of space is not unique to the Greeks. Second of all, the idea that ancient people were unaware of precession of equinox is before Hipparchus, who happens to be a Greek, by the way, before Hipparchus, is doubtful. And I'll explain that a little bit more as I go through the history. But it's doubtful that people before Hipparchus had no idea about precession of equinoxes, because they are keeping records of where the equinoctial point is in relationship to the stars. What Hipparchus did was put it all in one concise thing, state it clearly, and give an actual measurement of how fast it changes. Okay, so the heart of the matter, however, the argument that the Greeks perverted the Babylonian zodiac, the Babylonian zodiac was sidereal. The Greeks, for whatever Greek reasons, too much yogurt, too much hair on their chest, whatever, they perverted it because they're perverts. They perverted the Babylonian zodiac to be tropical because they live in the Mediterranean Sea. They like tropical stuff. The heart of the matter is whether or not the Babylonian zodiac was sidereal. This whole argument is built on the idea that, hey, the Babylonians had a sidereal zodiac, and then later the Greeks changed it. If that's wrong, then the whole version of history built on that is wrong, okay? So you probably have heard this before, that the Babylonian zodiac was sidereal. They used a sidereal zodiac because modern siderealists really vigorously promote this idea. The idea was developed by somebody called Cyril Fagan, who is a relatively modern person. I think what was his dates were? I think late 19th century. So this is an idea that Cyril Fagan came up with. Cyril Fagan, honestly, was nobody particularly special or qualified. He wasn't a great anything, but he had these interesting ideas about Babylonian astrology that really caught on and created the sidereal movement in the West. So as a result of that, everybody is like quoting Cyril Fagan as if he's there some Tapagacharya, like founding guru. But if you use your own head and you just be objective about it and look at the Mula pin, of course you don't know how to read cuneiform, but you can even just look at the translations of a Mula pin. Now, what's Mula pin? Mula pin is a surviving document of Babylonian astrology that's roughly as old as Rig Veda. So if you just read that, forget what everybody's saying about the Babylonians and just actually read the Mula pin, you'll see that they had a tropical 12-fold 30-degree division of the sky based on solstices and equinoxes. And their whole yearly calendar was based on that. And you're also going to find out that they had sidereal divisions of the sky as well. They also divided the sky into constellations. Just like Parashara Shastra is saying, you look at the sky and you can see lights up there and you can divide them into constellations. And you can also divide it into 12 vibhagas. That is the ubiquitous way that people thought about the sky, that it can be divided by constellations or by the sun's movement. And each lunation would mark out another segment of the sun's movement. So we would get 12 30-degree segments. The Babylonians have exactly this idea. They have side by side a 12-fold 30-degree division based on equinoxes and also a sidereal division. But listen, the sidereal division doesn't have 12. There's not 12 sidereal constellations, nor are they equal size. And that's the case in all the cultures as well. The Babylonians had 18, possibly 17, depending on how you read the text. So let's say 18. So they had these two ways of looking at the sky, just as the Indians have, just as everybody had. One way was a solar way, and one way was a lunar way. One way was at night, how you see the stars. One way was during the day, how you experience the light. The tropical division is based on equinoxes, how you experience the light. Where are the shadows? How long is the day? And the other way is you look up at the stars and you see the constellations. Now, so the idea that the Babylonians had a 12-fold sidereal zodiac is highly doubtful, because actually they had an 18-fold sidereal system and a 12-fold tropical system. Now, besides Babylon, you also have India with a lot of surviving ancient texts. In those texts, you got Siddhantas, Puranas, Brahmanas, and even Samhitas and Vedangas, and many of those things that I've just mentioned are supposed to really significantly predate Greek culture. And in those books, you have definitions of a tropical zodiac. So the argument that the Greeks created the tropical zodiac as one of their follies and mistakes doesn't make any sense, because the Babylonians had some concept of a tropical division of the sky, and the Puranas, Itihasas, I'm not sure about Itihasas, Puranas, Siddhantas, Brahmanas, Samhitas, Vedanga, Jyotish, they have also a tropical version of the sky as well. So this concept of how to divide the year, the sun's orbit around the earth over the course of the year, it's in Atharva Veda. How to divide that into 12 segments of 30 pegs each, 30 days each. That predates Greek culture. So the idea that the Greeks invented this stuff is bogus. It's not really something that you want to put stock in. So how would a more accurate view of history, of course, nobody knows history. Even when history is happening, you don't know what's really happening. But probably a much more accurate view of history would be to realize that all cultures had both a sidereal and a tropical system side by side. But the way that this differs from the way you would probably think of this is they're not the same system. Like these days, people think, yeah, tropical and sidereal both work. And, you can use the tropical zodiac or you can use the sidereal zodiac. That's not the way it was in ancient culture. There was a difference between the sidereal and the tropical. They both coexisted, but they weren't the same thing. So the tropical system in all the cultures always had 12 equal divisions of 30. Right? But the sidereal systems always had not 12. And the numbers would range from 17, which was 17 or 18, which was Babylonian, to like 27 or 28, which is Indian and Chinese, to 33, which is Egyptian. So this is a really important thing to realize, is just as what was in the original thing that we talked about in Brihat Parashara Shastra, that the sidereal and the tropical way of looking at space coexist, but are not the same thing. They're tulia, they're equitable, they're equatable, but they're not this identical. Now, the sidereal systems, the one like, the 28 nakshatras, 27 nakshatras, 33, decans, 17 constellations in Babylon, those systems were used in the ancient world much more extensively than the tropical 12-fold system. The tropical 12-fold system was mostly only utilized for making your calendars. These star things were also utilized for making calendars, but also for other things. So it's not that just because something is used for a calendar that it's not a divination tool. Calendars are divination tools. But the tropical zodiac in the ancient times was only used for calendars, and the sidereal systems of different numbers of constellations were used for divination because You could just look with your eyes and see the omens. You could see Saturn is in such and such nakshatra or crossing this star. You didn't need math. You didn't need calculations. And these are the old days. But the tropical 12-fold system exploded in popularity around 2,500 years ago. The explosion began. Because as soon as the mathematics for it became figured out for how to calculate where these zodiac divisions are, and specifically where the planets are in relation to the zodiac, because you can't see it. You have to calculate it. It's a very calculative system. Once the math for calculating it was worked out, that baby took off. The same thing that I said before answering somebody's question about why don't we just use nakshatras and forget about 12 signs? Because this stuff is great. This is a great system. It's just that the cultures didn't have the math to be able to use it often. But once the math developed, they started using it like crazy, and it took over from the older systems. But the math was young, and they would have to constantly fact check. They would constantly have to visually check to see if their calculations were correct. So they kept correlating signs to stars. Like, look, we think that the moon is in Gemini today. Our calculation, or let's say, we think that the moon is in Gemini today. Our calculations show that today the moon should be in Gemini. Let's see if we're right. That's how they were able to develop the math. Let's see if we're right. Well, how can you see if you're right? You can't see Gemini. No, yeah, you can. You see the stars over there? That's where Gemini is right now. That's where Gemini is. So if we see the moon within such and such arc degrees from that star, then we got it right. The moon is actually in Gemini. And so this begins the stuff that is perplexing us these days. Why are these ancient horoscopes mentioning the amount of distance from the moon to this star? And then saying the moon is in Gemini. Are they using a sidereal system? Because they have to check something invisible against something visible. All right, so let's see if you have any questions about that history. So just to summarize it while you type in your questions, the summary is it's not tenable that the Greeks invented the tropical zodiac, because there's a tropical system evident in the Mula Pen, which predates the Greeks. There's a tropical system evident in the Atharva Veda, Vedanga Jyotish, definitely in the Puranas, very explicitly in the Puranas, and very, very explicitly in Surya Siddhanta, which are supposed to predate the Greeks. Especially the stuff like Shatapatha Brahmana and things like that. So it's not really tenable to say that the Greeks invented it. And what's more reasonable is to say that sidereal and tropical ways of seeing the sky coexisted and still do coexist. But however, the relationship to each other is not fixed. The relationship between a tropical system and a sidereal system is not fixed, and the sidereal system is not identical to the tropical system. Sidereal system is a group of constellations, which, the Vedic people group the constellations according to the moon's daily mean motion. So that's why they get 27. I don't know why Babylonians or Egyptians did what they did. I'm sure there's some reason, but I don't know it. And so you get these 27 groups of stars, and then you get these 12 areas of space, and they have some relationship to each other, but they're not the same. But when they start using the 12 things extensively for divination and horoscopes, they have to reference it to the stars, because the stars are the only ways for them to check if their calculations are correct. I hope that's clear. Let me know. They did work, a lot of work, but it's just like today people are working to invent the next iPhone. In those days, people were working to figure out how to calculate where the planets are, because it's real important. Because actually astrology works, and also it's even based on very simpler things too. Like the very simple things about astrology are like, when is it going to get cold? When do we have to harvest and stuff like that? So they would work really hard on this. Any questions about this? Was that when Prashna Hori started? Prashna Hori is probably very, very old. Prashna Hori probably was easily used before natal astrology, but the question is still like, am I going to answer your Prashna with a sidereal reference or a tropical reference? So in the ancient times, it would be answered with a sidereal reference because it would just take too long to calculate the thing, or they didn't even know how to calculate it. Okay. Let's see what else we got. So the Greeks knew about nakshatras, you wants to know. The Greeks, maybe they knew about nakshatras, but the Greeks were basing most of their stuff off of Chaldeans, which are Babylonians. And the Babylonians, they had what the Sanskrit word nakshatra means constellation. So every culture has constellations. The Greeks mostly took their constellations from the Babylonians. Yes, so the development of math, Neil, is what brought tropical out of being just something that you use to calculate the calendar into being a tool that I can calculate your birth time with this and find your hora, find your ascendant. Greedy Rick, so you're saying that tropical was used before sidereal. No, you got to listen carefully because I totally didn't say that. Right, so I said the sidereal and tropical both coexisted, but the sidereal stuff was used much more extensively in the ancient times before the mathematics were available to use the tropical system more extensively. But about 2,500 years ago, as the mathematics became available, the popularity of the tropical system exploded. And it is linked to stars because they are linking the tropical phenomenon to the stars so that they can make sure their calculations of where things are is correct. Prakriti says that I mentioned in another video that nakshatras are Swarga or Swalok, where the planets are Bhuvalok. So is that why the nakshatra movement is a bit slower? So you see, yeah, that's right. The inner solar system is in the middle plane, and then the nakshatras are in the distant plane. So that's why they're not linked to each other. When did sidereal become more popular again? Not until Cyril Fagan started coming out with some ideas that the Babylonians that were doing sidereal stuff. So since our astrology is based on Babylonian stuff, maybe we would be more accurate to do it sidereally. But as I said, he's wrong. Cyril Fagan didn't get it right. Or he didn't phrase it right. They weren't doing 12-fold zodiac systems sidereally. They were doing 18-fold constellational systems sidereally. And the other thing is that sidereal zodiac was always used in India. So this is also history that has to be explained. Why there was a period of time between, I would say, 300 BCE, for lack of a better point, to probably about 300 CE, so like 600 years, where it was contentious. Nobody was really sure exactly how you should define the calculations. We kept saying that if the moon is within 3 degrees of this star, then it's in Gemini. So isn't that the basis for what Gemini is? So there was a period of time where that was not clearly known, both in India and in outside of India. And it really made very little difference at that time because all of the marker points were still so freshly calculated. So the deviation between that's caused by the precession of the equinoxes wasn't much. So it wasn't until 3rd or 4th century, I think, I'm just estimating the historical dates, that the Indians said, you know what, we're going to stick with how we have calculated the rashis, the signs in relation to Ashvini. We're going to stick with that. Whereas the rest of the world said, we're going to stick with the fact that the signs are supposed to be based on the equinoxes. Thank you, Kristen. I'm glad to hear that. She wants to know, in your view, which system is more precise in predictions? So tropical, but you can do anything well if you're good. It's like you can ride a crappy skateboard and really do good tricks if you're a really great skateboarder. And I'm doing, if you look in my video, look on my YouTube channel, like I've recently done examples comparing some difficult cases. Like there's difficult cases where people can easily contend that, look, sidereal is better for describing this person. So some of the cases that were brought up with Einstein and Trump. So I recently analyzed Einstein and Trump. Another one's supposed to be Hitler. So that's the next on my list. And yeah, the the house system that I use is a whole sign. Arabs actually are 27. The Arabs are described nakshatras as lunar mansions, and they got 27 of them, maybe 28. But it is based on exactly the same concept as how we wind up with our nakshatras. Let's look at one more point. I got one more point for you. Can you imagine this? It's over an hour already. Anyway, this is interesting stuff. So there's one more point that people brought up. Richard Fiedler brought this up in the debate that I had with him like months ago. And this new person that I'm going to debate now is bringing this up too. They're bringing up the point that in surviving Greek texts, we find them talking about the equinoctial point being at various places in Aries besides 0 degrees. So according to these people, that's strong evidence, or it even proves that that originally the zodiac wasn't affixed to the equinox. Otherwise, how would the equinox point be anywhere except 0 Aries? Okay. So let me take a minute to explain this and see if I can explain it in a reasonable way. So remember what I'm saying, what I just explained, that you have to correlate signs to stars. If you don't correlate signs to stars, you're not going to be able to learn how to calculate where planets are in relation to the signs. So in order to figure out the math of how to calculate where the planets are exactly in relationship to the signs, you have to correlate them to stars. Because that's what you can measure. You can measure a star. You can make a little machine, a device that will measure the arc distance between that point of light and that point of light. But you can't make a machine to measure the arc distance between this point of light and nothing at all. And so, in a theory. Actually, it's not nothing at all or a theory, but it's this point of light and the position of the sun relative to the equator. You can't see it at the same time that you could see that point of light. So the need to correlate the tropical system to sidereal stars is the reason why you get a lot of confusing stuff. Just like I said with the Vedic texts, it's like if they just said, hey, Ashvini is the beginning of Aries, it wouldn't be confusing. But they say Ashvini is at the beginning of Aries, and then sometimes they say Aries is at the equinox. So it's confusing. You have to try to figure it out. So if these guys never said, look, when the moon is within X degrees of this star, it just entered Gemini, then we would have no problems with this. But they said that, look, like in your horoscopes, they say, yeah, Saturn was within 1 degree of such and such star. So it's confirmed that it's at such and such zodiac position. So that gets confusing for us. Because now we think, look, they're basing their zodiac based on the stars. So anyway, now think about this. The need to correlate the stars and signs, that's why you find confusing statements about the position of the equinox. So if you go back and look in Mulapin, now Mulapin is that ancient Babylonian text. Or if you look in the Rig Veda and Taittiriya Brahmana, which are ancient Indian texts, you're going to hear that the equinox was in Pleiades. That's how we know that these things were written about 5,000 years ago. Pleiades for Babylonians is called Mul Mul. Look at that, Mul Mul. It's the first star. It's the first constellation. They called it Mul Mul. Every other star is called Mul something else. So, originally, 5,000 years ago, they're saying like, the equinox is in Mul Mul, which is the Pleiades. Then, as time progresses, the equinox precesses. And then it would move into what we basically call Aries, but they didn't call Aries. They call it Muluhugu. No, what is it? Muluhuga. Muluhuga. So it goes from Mul to Muluhuga. Muluhuga was their farmer. That was a constellation that was the farmer. That. Then you get this guy called Naburi Manu, who is one of the most ancient astronomers that we still have a surviving record of. He was a Babylonian. And what happened was when Babylon fell, the Greeks tried to rescue some of the libraries. So somebody named Callisthenes rescued some tablets under the advice of Aristotle, under the order of Aristotle or something. Callisthenes went and rescued some tablets about astronomy written by Naburi Manu. And Naburi Manu it's because of those tablets from Naburi Manu that Greeks start saying the equinoctial point is at such and such degree in Aries. Because they're correlating Muluhuga to Aries, because that's what their constellation is called. And what this Chaldean or Babylonian astrologer is saying is, oh, the equinox point is moving. And this is where I'm saying it's very, very doubtful for you to believe that nobody before Hipparchus knew anything about equinoctial precession. They did know about equinoctial precession, they just didn't get it to a science and state it in a clear, concise statement and actually measure it. That's what Hipparchus did. But Naburi Manu is already saying, it's gone, it's moved, it's not in Mul Mul anymore. Now it's in Muluhuga. And then the Greeks are translating Muluhuga into their version of the stars, which they've named more directly to how they correlate to the 12 signs. So that should explain why. Does that make sense to you? Does that explain why a Greek translation or a Greek who's riffing off of Naburi Manu would talk about the equinox being somewhere in Aries and not at the beginning of Aries? And it's also interesting that you're going to find it's not always the same. Sometimes they're going to say 15, 10, 8, 5 degrees Aries. They're getting different points. Basically, the answer is because this guy, first of all, it's not Aries. Aries is a translation. It's Muluhuga, the farmer. And second of all, it comes from the Chaldeans who are tracking the precession of the equinoxes. And they had tracked it moving from Mul Mul to Muluhuga. That's probably a complicated one, maybe not a good one to end on, but Muluhuga. Mul Mul. It's kind of interesting because India has Mul, and Mul means the beginning, like the root. Mul has, but this is Mul. And I think the reason why they call it Mul is there's something about 3 stars, and I think maybe Mul means 3 stars or something like that. But I don't know anything really too detailed about Babylonians compared to what I know about India. No, it's just the point is this. If you want to know where the zodiac signs, to put this simply, if you want to know where the zodiac signs begin and end, you have to know where the equinox is. Okay? So because the zodiacs are based on the equinoxes. So if you want to know where the equinox is, you have to reference it to well, if you want to know where the equinox is, you'll reference it to a star. And if you want to know where a planet is in reference to the equinox, and therefore in reference to the zodiac, you need to reference that planet to a star. So this is why ancient astrologers, ancient astronomers are always going to talk about the equinoctial point and a planet in reference to a star. Now, sometimes they talk about it in reference, for this Babylonian bit, sometimes they're going to talk about it in reference to the Pleiades, Mula Mula, or Mul Mul. And then as time progresses, they start talking about it in Muluhuga. Now, if you translate that bit Mulahuga, it's kind of like Aries, the Greek constellation Aries. You get the idea of how exactly does it translate. That's probably why there's a discrepancy of what does this Chaldean document of this degree in Mulahuga mean to us in our system, where we have a constellation called Aries. So I don't know if that's clear enough, but yeah, basically the point that you have to correlate the equinox to a star is why you have these weird statements. Make sense? So let's see, what would be my conclusion? So the version of history is faulty. This argument that the Greeks developed the tropical zodiac is faulty because the tropical zodiac existed in pre-Greek cultures, both in India and Babylon. And the statement that the Indian classics unequivocally say that Aries begins with Ashwini is also completely wrong. The classics sometimes say that Aries begins with Ashwini, and they sometimes say that Aries begins with the equinox. So it's not something that you can just figure out in 3.5 seconds. It's something you have to sort out carefully and not dismiss in haste. And if you carefully analyze the statements in the Indian classics, you're going to see that the zodiac is described as being permanently affixed to the equinoxes and solstices, and then the equinoxes and solstices are described as having a certain relationship to the stars, and that relationship changes slowly over time. And the reason why that relationship is important is so that you can calculate things accurately. So hopefully this clears up a bunch of stuff. And now I'll probably get on and try to make this video and figure out how to get it into 5 or 10 minutes. Okay, guys, thanks for being with me here and helping me discuss this. Any last questions? Please turn on subtitles or closed captions. How do I do that? What, YouTube would automatically do it? And how would they closed caption Mulahuga? I would love to see the weird stuff that they come up with that. No, the sidereal zodiac is defined as starting from Ashwini, and there's no option. Okay, guys. Watch the video again, hopefully, because there's a lot to digest. Thanks so much. See you around.